$20,000. You clock in for $10 an hour, a number that doesn't just define your paycheck, it dictates your dignity. It looms over you at the laundromat, whispers to you at the pharmacy, and silences you whenever someone asks what you do for a living. Your monthly take-home is a meager $1,400. Rent claims $750 of that just so you can occupy a cramped corner of a drafty basement, living under a stranger's roof and trying to sleep through the heavy footsteps above your head at 3 a.m. You eat whatever is cheap and fast, canned soup, cheap bread, generic peanut butter, and you stop pretending this is a lifestyle choice. You don't make choices anymore. The math makes them for you. Your worn-out sedan has 210,000 miles on the odometer, and the tire pressure warning light has become a permanent part of the dashboard. You only put $15 of fuel in at a time, because a full tank means you can't pay the internet bill. Everything at this level is a brutal compromise. Medicine or electricity. Meanwhile, your old classmates have drifted into different orbits. Some are building careers, others are buying houses. You scroll through their highlight reels on your cracked screen while sitting in your car eating a cold convenience store sandwich between your two jobs. You don't even envy them. Comparing your reality to theirs is too exhausting to contemplate. It doesn't motivate you, it just stings. At midnight, you scour job boards. Every entry-level opening demands 3 years of experience you have no way of acquiring. The trap isn't a lack of effort, it's the hamster wheel. You work, you pay, you scrape by, and you repeat. And the heaviest weight on your chest isn't today's struggle, it's the terrifying whisper that you might be stuck in this loop forever. The first rule: at $20,000, you don't run your finances. Your finances run you. $35,000. For the first time in your life, your pay stub doesn't feel like an insult. $35,000. It's the point where you finally get a company dental plan, a real direct deposit that hits like clockwork every other Thursday, and an actual office cubicle where you can hang a calendar without wondering if you'll be fired by the end of the month. You pack your single duffel bag and leave that moldy basement room behind. You sign a lease on a tiny third-floor studio apartment. The hallway smells faintly of someone else's cooking, but once you close your door, the lock clicks, and the quiet space on the other side is entirely yours. You sit on the floor of your empty living room, listening to the absolute silence, and realize you haven't felt this calm in years. At the store, you grab a carton of strawberries and a bottle of decent shampoo without having to pull up your calculator app first. You finally drop off that stack of shirts at the dry cleaners that have been sitting in your trunk since last winter. And when the bill comes, you tap your card without holding your breath. You buy a modest working laptop, not a gaming rig, just something that doesn't loudly whir and overheat when you open 3 tabs. But $35,000 in a suburb where basic utilities and rent eat up 60% of your paycheck is still a tight squeeze. The difference is that the pressure isn't crushing your ribs anymore. It just sits quietly on your back. It's still there, but you can breathe. The sharp, dizzying panic of level 1 is gone, replaced by a quiet, nagging awareness. You know that one major car repair or a broken tooth could still wipe out your tiny savings cushion. But you start noticing the world around you in a way you couldn't before. You look at your supervisor, who doesn't even glance at the prices on the lunch menu. You see coworkers talking about booking weekend cabin trips or buying concert tickets. You aren't bitter, you're just paying attention now. On Friday nights, you still check your banking app out of pure habit. The balance isn't a victory, but it's no longer a crime scene either. You've landed safely in the gray zone between survival and actual comfort. And from this spot, you finally lift your head to see what lies ahead. The second rule. At $35,000, you finally stop running from today and start planning for tomorrow. And once you start planning, the horizon shifts. $50,000. You've officially climbed into the quiet comfort of the national median. A number that buys you a subscription to a completely standard life. You sign a lease on a suburban townhouse with a small patch of grass in the back. You buy a real couch, not a Craigslist find, but a brand new one from a showroom floor. Your kitchen has a dishwasher that actually runs, and your pantry is stocked with the name-brand groceries you used to pass by. You drive a sensible hybrid that starts quietly every single morning. You have a gym membership, a couple of active streaming subscriptions, and the ability to buy a ticket to a concert without feeling like you're ruining your monthly budget. One evening, you log into a retirement calculator. You plug in your $50,000 salary, your neat 3% annual raises, and your modest savings rate. You look at the graph. The line is flat, predictable, and runs uninterrupted for the next 35 years. It ends exactly where you are right now, safe, dry, and entirely ordinary. You stare at that straight line and feel a cold wave of disappointment settle in. The frustration doesn't come from failure. It comes from the realization that you played by all the rules just to reach a plateau. You attend a casual weekend get-together with acquaintances. You listen to someone talk about booking a spontaneous trip to Tokyo, while another mentions hiring an interior designer for their new place. They aren't bragging, it's just their normal. You look down at your showroom couch and suddenly see it differently. You realized that while you were celebrating your escape from the panic of survival, the rest of the world was playing an entirely different game. You can look back and see the struggle of your $20,000 self, and you are deeply relieved to be gone. But you look up, and the gap between your safe plateau and the wealth above you feels wider and more glaring than ever. 50,000 is the mirror. It shows you exactly what you've built and exactly how much of the world is still locked behind a price tag you can't afford. $75,000. You wake up, and for the first time in your life, the morning doesn't begin with a mental audit of your checking account. $75,000 is the quiet transition from constant negotiation to effortless breathing. You move out of the crowded suburb and rent a cozy, sunlit flat on the top floor of a historic brick building near the city center. The plumbing actually works, and you have a small balcony where you grow fresh herbs in neat terracotta pots. You buy a sturdy, high-end mountain bike just because you want to explore the trails on weekends. When you go out for dinner, you order the artisanal appetizer and the import beer without looking at the right side of the menu first. You book a direct flight to visit family for the holidays. Not the grueling red-eye with 2 layovers, but the comfortable morning departure. You aren't wealthy, but you are finally insulated from the friction of daily life. Yet, this insulation comes with a quiet cost. Distance. One evening, you're catching up with a friend from your old neighborhood over coffee. They are stressed, venting about a sudden $400 car repair bill that has completely thrown off their month. You listen, nodding, and your instinct is to say, "Don't worry, it'll work out." But you catch yourself. To you, $400 is just a minor inconvenience, a line item adjustment on your banking app. To them, it's a crisis. You realize with a sudden, sharp pang that you no longer speak the same financial language. You have crossed an invisible border, and the altitude of your new life has begun to thin the air between you and the people you left behind. You didn't actively try to drift away. The quiet security of $75,000 simply built a wall of convenience around you, shielding you from the noise of the struggle below. The fourth rule. At $75,000, the constant noise of money finally falls silent. And in that silence, you are left to hear the quiet distance growing between your present and your past. $150,000. For the first time, your lifestyle upgrades are impossible for the outside world to ignore. $150,000 is when your success steps out of your bank account and into the physical world. You trade your practical hybrid for a sleek, whisper-quiet electric sedan, and you sign a lease on a sprawling loft with high ceilings, exposed brick, and a private rooftop deck overlooking the skyline. Your annual vacations are no longer quick domestic getaways. You find yourself boarding a flight to a boutique eco-resort in Portugal, or booking a week-long ski chalet in Aspen without a second thought. You hire a weekly cleaning service to handle your home, and you buy custom-fitted Italian wool suits for work. You aren't just comfortable, your daily environment has been polished to a brilliant, friction-free shine. Yet, the most profound shift isn't the luxury, it's the sudden, quiet onset of financial amnesia. You meet up with a cousin who is stressed because their old refrigerator just died, and they aren't sure how they'll pay to replace it. You listen to them speak, and while you feel genuine empathy, you realize with a jolt of alarm that you can no longer emotionally connect to the panic of that situation. To you, a broken appliance is a 20-minute online order. To them, it is a weeks-long crisis. You have forgotten what it feels like to have your mood dictated by an unexpected bill. You now measure your wealth not by the objects you own, but by your absolute autonomy, your ability to walk away from a toxic project, to take months of unpaid leave, or to say no to people who drain your energy without worrying about the financial fallout. You have entered a world where money has become so completely solved that it disappears from your vocabulary entirely, replaced by a quiet, subtle distance that places you on an island of your own. At $150,000, money stops being a topic of discussion. It becomes the deep, unspoken silence between conversations that nobody in your circle ever needs to have again. $250,000. You no longer look at money as a tool for acquisition. You look at it as a complex math problem that needs solving before the tax year ends. $250,000 is the threshold where your daily vocabulary shifts from basic personal finance into the cold, dense language of wealth management. Your conversations with your wealth advisor are no longer about building an emergency fund, but about maximizing tax loss harvesting and setting up a private trust. You buy a historic brownstone in an exclusive enclave where your neighbors are corporate attorneys and specialized surgeons. You don't take commercial flights anymore. You purchase shares in a private aviation club to bypass terminal queues entirely. When you dine out, it's at discreet, member-only clubs where the menus don't have prices because everyone in the room has already prepaid their annual dues. Your life is remarkably streamlined, completely insulated, and incredibly quiet. But this extreme insulation creates a gravitational pull that quietly shrinks your social world. You sit at a family dinner, and someone complains about the rising cost of local property taxes. You instinctively begin to explain how they can restructure their property holding into an LLC to offset those liabilities. You watch their eyes glaze over, replaced by a sudden, cold barrier of polite distance. To them, you aren't offering helpful advice. You are speaking a foreign dialect of privilege. You realize that you can no longer share your actual daily worries, like capital gains exposure or estate planning, with anyone outside your tax bracket without sounding insufferably out of touch. By sheer gravity, your old relationships begin to drift away, leaving you surrounded only by those who share your altitude. You haven't become arrogant. The sheer difference in your daily realities has simply made the air too thin for the old connections to survive, leaving you in a very comfortable but undeniably empty room. $500,000. You no longer look at prices, and you haven't logged into a banking app to check your balance in over 2 years. $500,000 is the tipping point where money itself becomes completely invisible, and your only remaining metric of value is the ticking of the clock. Your life is engineered entirely around the ruthless preservation of your hours. You hire a private driver so you can answer emails in the back seat instead of navigating traffic. You pay a high-end concierge service to manage your dry cleaning, your grocery stocking, and even the coordination of your holiday calendar. You buy a remote, heavily wooded estate at the end of a private road, protected by security gates and a dense wall of ancient pine trees. When you travel, you hire a private yacht charter to explore secluded islands, far away from crowded tourist beaches. Every transaction is no longer about buying an object or an experience. It is about buying an hour back, or buying an extra layer of insulation from the friction of the public. But this absolute focus on efficiency creates a profound, almost clinical detachment from humanity. You happen to pass by a bus stop on a freezing winter afternoon. You see a young person huddled in a thin coat, shivering as they wait for a delayed bus, and you feel nothing but a strange, analytical curiosity. You remember that you once stood in those exact shoes, but the memory feels like a scene from a movie you watched decades ago, completely disconnected from your reality. You realize that your wealth has successfully bought you out of the human contract. You no longer have to deal with difficult neighbors, crowded spaces, or the messy, inconvenient problems of ordinary people. You have used your capital to build a perfectly silent, flawless fortress, and in doing so, you have severed the final threads linking you to the struggle of your youth. You aren't cruel. You have simply paid a premium to make the rest of the world fade into the background, leaving you entirely undisturbed and entirely alone. At $500,000, your money doesn't purchase joy, It purchases insulation. It buys a quiet, beautiful space where the world can no longer reach you. $1 million. You no longer trade your time for capital. You deploy your capital to reshape the landscape around you. $1 million a year is the altitude where currency ceases to be a medium of exchange and becomes a structural leverage tool, a force of gravity that alters the orbit of industries and institutions. You find yourself in boardroom meetings where your signature on a single term sheet can fund an entire startup incubator, revitalize a decaying urban block, or halt a corporate acquisition. You purchase an expansive ranch in Wyoming with its own private airstrip, and you employ a full-time operations director just to oversee your household staff and real estate holdings. When you travel, you don't book suites. You lease entire private compounds for your family and advisors to ensure absolute privacy. Your daily decisions are no longer about personal comfort or lifestyle upgrades. They are about capital allocation, systemic influence, and legacy. But this immense structural reach completely erases the emotional geography of your past. You read a news article about a local supermarket chain closing down, leaving a working-class neighborhood without a grocery store, and your immediate instinct is to analyze the commercial real estate plays and municipal tax incentives required to acquire and restructure the property. You suddenly realize that you can no longer view a basic human necessity through anything other than a lens of macroeconomic strategy. The memories of your $20,000 self, of counting pennies for bread, of the cold fear of a declined card, no longer feel like your own. They have become historical anecdotes, a myth of a past life that belongs to a person you can no longer conceptually or emotionally replicate. You have transitioned from a participant in the economy to an architect of it. You are not detached out of malice. You have simply scaled to a point where your personal finances have dissolved into structural power, leaving you in a quiet, elevated space where you no longer measure what you can buy, but how far your shadow falls. At $1 million, money ceases to be a metric of your net worth. It becomes a measure of your structural reach, and that reach rewrites the very core of who you are.